seen the most magnificent images of dry and dusty central Australia becoming a landscape of lakes and rolling green hills. Now, if only we could keep this land wet and fertile, because it must have been probably 50,000, 60,000 years ago, maybe 100,000. Dr. Peter Reid is a geophysicist with over 100 publications and 35 years experience working in the Great Barrier Reef, and developed a wide range of world-first optical and electronic instruments for measuring environmental conditions near corals and other ecosystems. He was head of physics at James Cook University for over a decade before being removed in 2018 for questioning the quality assurance systems used by reef science institutions. Now, Peter's an Adjunct Fellow of the Institute of Public Affairs. First of all, Peter, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for waiting. You saw the whole program. We actually played the clip I wanted to play before, but we'll push it right back to about midnight, of Central Australia. It looked magnificent, didn't it?
It did. This is the wonderful thing about Australia, isn't it? These changes, and you've got to celebrate when you have some good seasons. I knew an old grazier from Richmond out here in Queensland, and he reckoned, you have one good year every 10 years, basically drought for 9 years, a good year for 10 years, for that one last one, and you've got to do the best. And of course, Australian agriculture is one of their real successes is being able to deal with this very, very dry continent. You travel around, you see these remarkable off-river water bodies where they've made little dams and they pump water into them. So it is wonderful what we have been able to do with this incredibly arid country, but we've also got to celebrate when it looks so beautiful like it does in the centre at the moment.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. I've played it several times today because I can't believe how gorgeous it is. How long will this last for, Peter?
Oh, it'll be just a few months. So the lake air will then slowly dry out over a few years. And if you go back a long time, if you go back to say 19,000 years ago, lake air, that whole Simpson Desert area, was much drier than it even is now. So some of the clips there where you see those sand dunes, at the moment they have low hills, low scrub on them. They're not just a pure sand like a Sahara Desert. But if you go back to 20,000 years ago, those sand hills there that you can see there would have been completely without any vegetation at all. So we have these tremendous changes. And just to throw something else in that may be interesting to people, because of all the extra carbon dioxide in our atmosphere because of burning coal, we've gone up from 300 parts per million to 420 or whatever it is at the moment. The water utilisation ability of those dry plants and those grasses is substantially increased. So Australia, even in a bad year, is now greener than what it used to be in a bad year in the past. So it is now a greener continent, and this has been measurable from satellites. You can actually see it in the satellite data, and that is almost certainly largely due to the extra carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. I can explain how that works in terms of the plant if you wish, but they also see it in Africa and other dry areas. So it's one of the good things about burning coal and burning diesel and those sorts of things.
Tell me, I would love to know, how come, this is great English, why did the land dry out?
Well, some of it is the change in the way that the Earth's orbit and the inclination of the way it spins. So these are called the Milankovitch cycles, but they don't explain everything. So about 18,000 years ago, it was incredibly dry, right? And suddenly it changed. So whereas the orbital cycles tend to change very, very gently, there was a sudden change, and the world's got a lot warmer. The more water in the Central Australia, changes everywhere. Coral reefs out in the Galapagos Islands suddenly disappeared, and some of them came back. So most of those huge climate change events of the past, we actually have almost no idea what's causing them. And so this is one of the interesting things when you talk about the whole climate change debate, that are we really sure that the warming that we've seen over the last 50 or 100 years isn't just a natural thing? Because we actually don't understand the natural climate and the variations at all.
I've just heard two things. You mentioned carbon dioxide, and I heard the keyboards, when people type gently, well, they weren't typing gently. And then when you said they have no idea why we're warming, or why the Earth's getting a bit warmer if it's a natural thing, I wasn't sure if it was a click of a shotgun or their heads hitting the table in absolute despair. And believe me, that's not such a bad sound to hear. It shows you that if we had water for the centre of Australia, we'd have this magnificent, I would imagine, community that you could grow just about anything. But we need water, and I suppose that would mean that we would need to have dams. Do you see in your lifetime, because Tony Abbott once said we're the food bowl to basically the world, and all you have to do is make sure that you provide the water. Well, we've seen what the water does in the centre of Australia. If you were a good businessman and you had money like Bill Gates, for example, you would seriously look at doing something, because it's not going to cost you a whole lot for the land, but also you're going to have this great resource. All you need is water. And if you bring that down from the top end of Australia, instead of it going out into the oceans, we are actually feeding not only the rest of the world, but we're providing food security, which is an important issue at the moment for Australia.
That's true. I think you've always got to accept that Australia is going to be a very dry continent, that it is not easy to get water from the north. There are great expenses. But as I mentioned before, if you actually let the average farmer just deal with, because there's a lot of groundwater, and Australians are very good at using that groundwater, storage of water during floods, not necessarily in great big dams, but in much smaller things, as you see in the Darling Downs and various other areas. But although that there's a lot of hoo-ha about not allowed to be building dams, I've heard of lots of graziers who've been saying that they're not able to build smaller dams just off a creek to try to capture the flood water so that they can then use it for cropping or whatever later on in the season. So that's regulations that are stopping these things happening. They're not the great big things, but there's 1,000 examples of where little things are being stopped. So yes, we're never going to be a food bowl like the centre of Europe or something like that. We're always going to be very dry. But on the other hand, we can do better than we are now, and we are undoubtedly being greatly restricted in many, many ways. As Will said just before, in so many ways, and that's actually causing people in Indonesia, if we don't produce a cow here, then somebody in Indonesia with live export trade, they're not going to be having mince or sausages or anything like that if we don't produce.
Plastic meat, that's what Bill wants us to eat, or veggie burger. No, it doesn't really cut the cake, does it? Or the burger bun. Tell us about your thoughts, because I see Chris Bowen, this is just off topic a bit. Chris Bowen he's like this pygmy on this big horse who thinks he's Sir Galahad saving the world. Should remind him what happened to Joan of Arc. But I'm just thinking though, if you look at your area, Townsville, you've got these monstrosities going up. You're raising parts of the Great Dividing Range and creating all sorts of problems once they're installed. We see farmers in Victoria being bulldozed out of the road because of saving the planet. We see other issues, the push for renewables, and they're never going to work. Then we see data centres popping up that require a great chunk of water and constant energy. Net zero, they're still gung-ho about it. How do we, and we talk about changing, you can change a direction of a country by changing political parties. As far as I can see, there's not a whole lot of difference still, even though Angus is there. Look at Victoria, Jess Wilson. She's as woke as get out of here, and her policies on the environment and renewable energy is fairly similar to that of Jacinta Allen. How do we make a difference? How can we get into people's minds that, one, they've had a bad education to believe a lot of this claptrap, and secondly, how do we get them to say, okay, this is not the way we should be going. We need to be doing this differently. How do you get through their numbskulls, their brains?
Well, the numbskulls are not the general public. If you actually look at opinion polls now and you ask the question, so the Institute of Public Affairs has done this again and again, how much are you prepared to pay for net zero? The average answer is $2 a week, all right? $2 a week. Now, all we need to do is make sure that everybody realizes that you're paying through your taxes and your electricity bills and all the other things, you're paying probably 50 times that. And I think most people have actually got a feel of that. That's why they, if you don't really think that climate change is a big problem, then you're only prepared to pay $2 a week, right? So they actually get a feeling there's an exaggeration. So the problem is not the general populace. The problem is the inner city politicians, and I won't name any, but Matt Canavan is the opposite of that, right? So the leader of the Nationals is completely the opposite of that. You've obviously got Pauline Hanson, who would remove net zero at a drop of a hat. So the problem, I don't think, is the people. I think the problem is the politicians haven't actually quite realised that the populace has moved on. They've certainly moved on in Europe, they've moved on in America. And as I say, the key thing that tells you this is how much the average person is prepared to pay. And I wish some of those so-called conservative politicians in the cities would actually look at that data and actually start to become sensible again on energy and energy costs, because I'm sure that it's a vote winner for them.
Yeah, could you then tell me why the political parties are sticking with this?
I think they're scared. I really think that you'll find that in those inner cities, they talk amongst themselves, amongst the elites. And of course, the elites are the only people who care about this, right? The average person who's just in the western suburbs of Sydney or in the poorer parts of Melbourne, they want to just make sure they can fill up their tank and do all these things and live it. They're not interested in saving the world. But the elites in the political parties, I think they don't get that, at least in the cities. If you come up here to North Queensland, I can guarantee you almost all the politicians, even the Labor ones, are actually often very sensible on this, but not down in the cities. So I think they're just out of contact with the people. Now, it's very easy for me to say that to a politician, but I think you can see that in the opinion polls, in fact, now.
I think the bureaucracy or bureaucrats, whether they're in, as you have experienced in the past, with whether they're in government, local, federal, state, whether they're in universities or other organisations that profess to have that superior attitude. We know more. And unfortunately, with that we know more, there's always dollars following very quickly thereafter. Yeah. Peter, it's a pleasure chatting with you. I appreciate your time. Thank you for waiting so much. If somebody wants to find, because you do a podcast, so tell us about that and how they can follow that and how they can follow you and send you a cheerio.
We've got a YouTube channel called Reef Rebels. I'm also the chairman of the Australian Environment Foundation, which is basically an environment foundation for sensible people like farmers. And we've actually got a new Check the Science campaign. So go to the Australian Environment Foundation website. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. That's Peter Ridd there, a friend of ours, and speaks a lot of sense. This is the Country Telegraph.